Time goes by, years and decades. She comes, she goes, but her story remains so. She is you, I, and the others. She belongs to herself and not another. She is whole, complete, and absolute, for she is resolute. Hello and welcome to She is Resolute. I'm your host Suvarna, and our endeavor on this show is to showcase conversations of grit and growth for the determined modern woman willing to take complete ownership of her life and her mindset. Our attempt is to bring to the fore actionable information on personal development through discussions with experts and personalities who have, in one way or another, proven that they too are resolute. So enjoy the episode and please do like, share, and subscribe.
Music. It has a profound effect on people. It can change your mood. It can spark motivation and inspiration. It can help in generating creativity. It can invoke intense emotions and memories, and so many other effects that are so unique and subjective. Well, our guest today is an expert in understanding the effect that music has on the human brain from a psychological and neuroscience perspective. Fascinating, right? She, in the truest sense of the term, has followed her passion not just in one discipline, but in two highly skilled disciplines of music and neuroscience. Dr. Shantala Hegde is a clinical neuropsychologist and a trained vocalist who's not just the associate professor and consultant at India's premier National Institute of Mental Health and Neurosciences, a.k.a. NIMHANS at Bengaluru, but is also the head and has established the Music Cognition Laboratory at NIMHANS, which is the first of its kind in the country, conducting research on music cognition, neuromusicology, musical emotion, music and language, rhythm perception, effect of music on other cognitive processes in musically trained and untrained individuals. She's the recipient of several prestigious fellowships and recognitions and has worked and trained with many reputed national and international institutes and universities. As a musician, in Hindustani classical music, she has composed and sung for a music CD named Uma Sahasram. It is guests like Dr. Shantala Hegde who make She's Resolute truly rich because she's an example of being able to amalgamate your passions and interests into your purpose in life. Dr. Shantala, welcome to She is Resolute.
Thank you, Suvarna. Thank you for that warm welcome and that introduction. Truly humbled. Thank you.
We are so glad to have you on the show. And music is personally something that I'm very, very interested in and moved by. And you mentioned in one of your talks that music is a universal phenomenon. Uh, and music also, on the other hand, has unique and deeply subjective connotations. So I would love to understand how music began to play such a big role in your life personally.
Music has always been there around me. Uh, my grandfather actually was a Yakshagana, singer. My
Wow.
paternal father. And
Okay.
my native place is about 400 kilometers from Bengaluru. So this community called Havyaks and Yakshagana, which is a folk form, it's all quite famous. And Hindustani music was always there. So
Okay.
from childhood, I'm grateful to my parents and my immediate family circle who have always given music as a enriched environment, so to say. And I was always into singing, so I always loved singing. But I started formally learning when I was 8, and after that,
At 8.
yeah, and then it's
Okay.
gone ups and downs with academics going parallelly and all of that. So music has perhaps, if you ask me, has always been there since childhood with me. All forms of music. So I used to listen to a lot of Hindustani and other genres. I would treasure getting those cassettes when I was a kid and getting autographs from great musicians after listening to their concerts. And so music has been like, the thing that gave me meaning in life. Yeah.
Oh, so I would presume that for someone like you who has such a rich and such a strong musical background, you would probably go into music full time. So how did you venture into clinical psychology and neuropsychology, even though music was like had such a strong influence in your life?
Yeah. So, I had this other side, which was again thanks to my parents and my father, especially. He was always into spirituality, and,
I see.
and so with this background in the family, perhaps always we used to have discussions about mind, psyche, human behavior, and things like that. Perhaps that was one reason which kind of drew me towards understanding human behavior as such. And psychology became my passion. So when I still remember when I was in 10th, everybody were deciding which branch to take further, science or arts, humanities. I was looking back, I'm kind of surprised. I was very clear I want to do psychology. And music was always there, of course. And at one point, I thought, yeah, I should take music, more formally and take it professionally. But then I said, music was like a lifetime journey. Any subject, so to say, is a lifetime journey, no doubt. But I felt so-called academic career is also important. So I took up psychology, and then later, when I started doing my masters, that's when I got interested in looking at cognition, human behavior, physiological psychology. Those subjects kind of attracted me a lot more. And yeah, later was this marriage between music and neuropsychology that I did in my life. Yeah.
That's fascinating. I love how you've connected your discussions at home about consciousness and spirituality to trying to understand human behavior and human psyche. That's probably been my curve also at trying to learn. I'm not an expert in the subject, but I'm learning about the subject. And for me, also, it started through that journey of spirituality where I felt like I wasn't getting adequate answers or answers that were a little abstract or beyond my comprehension, or at least at this stage of my life beyond my comprehension. And psychology provided like a really good basis for everything about who we are, how we behave. So that's interesting. I understand how you made that transition now that you speak about it. And I do want to now get into how you married music with psychology, because that seems so unique. Like even in Western neuropsychology, there's not much that has been done about it as much as, other fields in neuroscience and psychology. So music and neuromusicology, how did you decide to marry the two disciplines? And what inspired you to study music as a tool to understand the human brain and its functions?
Yeah. So as I said, during my masters, I kind of got interested in physiological psychology, the biological psychology. So there are different branches in psychology. So one of
Okay.
it is cognitive and neurocognitive science, what we call neuro area.
Okay.
And so out of interest, I started, we used to have these seminars in college, and right. So we had the freedom to choose a topic, and I chose music. I said because I was so interested to know how do we perceive music? How do we understand music? What
Right.
impact does it have on people? And we know it, but to, the science mind of me wanted to ask questions of why, how, where, and, things like that. But then later, of course, I got into a formal training to be a clinical psychologist. So I did my MPhil at NIMHANS. And even during that process, I realized that there's not much research happening in that area. Although we know that music can have beneficial effect, we knew that music can have therapeutic effect. But whatever I heard was more, on and off research work that was happening in the country, but not formally, systematically done research work. So
Mm.
when I just joined my PhD and I finished my fellowship by the International Neuropsychological Society, and I came back, and I had this opportunity to meet one of the stalwarts in the field of cognitive neuroscience. He
Mm.
was my professor, my PhD guide's mentor, actually. His name is
I see.
Michael Posner. So he visited
I
our
see.
lab, and we had the opportunity to kind of interact and discuss and share ideas. He was like, no, you have to, kind of, why don't you pursue this seriously? And by then I had an opportunity to go to Canada to present a paper. a theoretical paper that I wrote about Indian music and how there's so much more to study about Indian music. And my visit to this lab, which is the International Brain and Sound Research Laboratory, it's called the BRAMS, one of the pioneering and the amazing labs in the world. So he encouraged me and said, "Why don't you take it, look into further and go meet people and all of that." Perhaps that was the turning point in my life because my PhD work wasn't related to music and psychology. I was working with patients with schizophrenia, developing a cognitive retraining module for them, and yeah, so perhaps that from then on, I said, why not look into this field? And I must thank many of my seniors, my mentors who said, yeah, why don't you try it? And um, I was lucky to even write a research proposal that got funded as a young investigator, by the Department of Science and Technology.
I read about that. That was
Yeah, and
fantastic.
then the journey kind of took its own path. There were ups and downs, but yeah, overall, very meaningful.
Yeah. Can you? I would love for you to talk about your laboratory, the music cognition laboratory, because it's the first of its kind in India. Can you tell us your journey about starting that?
Yeah. So I finished my PhD, and then just as I was finishing my PhD, I wrote this project for funding, looking at Indian classical music and emotional perception and ragas of
I see.
classical music. Because I was trained in Hindustani, it was easy for me to start from that point. And I just, thought, I was lucky again, I must say, that I got a position to work as a senior scientific officer back at NIMHANS. Although I had a short stint
Wow.
outside for just 6 months at Wipro in the cognitive psychology lab, I realized I'm not cut out for that. I'm more into research and academic field. So as a senior scientific officer, I started working with certain, several international collaborations, and started getting funds from various funding agencies. So around the same time, NIMHANS had this idea of starting a cognitive psychology lab, and I was working as a senior scientific officer there. And perhaps by then, I had kind of perhaps shown promise that this area is worth exploring, and a lot more work needs to be done, and it has a lot of application value, so to say, not
Yeah.
just looking at from just a pure academic and research questions and answers to those, but also how we could use this for our patient population, being a tertiary center. So our
Mhm.
admin and our former directors, my senior colleagues, and they were very encouraging. So it took time though. Initially, it was named as Cognitive Psychology Lab, but a few years ago, it was kind of renamed and rechristened as Music Cognition Laboratory. Yeah.
That's lovely because it's such a unique thing, and it's always going to be difficult to start something that's not done before and that's different. So, how did you overcome that a period where you must have faced some sort of doubts, or you must have been had uh, draw certain challenges along your way? So, what did you do at that point of time mentally? What did you do to keep pushing through?
A lot of challenges actually. So one, because it was a new area, and I was
Okay.
trying to convince people that I'm not looking at music as just music therapy. People, when you say the word music, because music is so universal, people think it's very easy. So what's about
Mm,
it? Music will have positive effect. Music will have benefits. So what's the big deal about it? No, I tried to tell people that we had to do systematic step-by-step research, looking at, in especially neuroscience and cognitive science, it takes time to build up the theory and build up the evidence to say, okay, this is how music is, perceived. And we there's so much more to know about the functioning of the human brain itself. So I was telling
absolutely.
people that I am maybe a musician, I am a trained singer, but I am doing neuroscience research. I'm not a music therapist to begin with. People
Okay.
thought I'm doing music therapy research. I said, no, of course, it will have application aspect of it in years to come. That was one challenge. And
Mm,
second was, I mean, I must say, again, by then, research work in the field of neuroscience and music was almost 3 decades old in the West. So we had
Right.
started doing it. So I had enough scientific literature to convince and say I could use the word music quite confidently. Whereas
Mm.
other researchers had to use words like auditory processing, you know, to kind of not say that it's a light kind of weighted word, but it's serious science that we're doing. That was one challenge. And thirdly, technology. So you had to catch up with technology. So I started
Right.
using electrophysiological parameters like EEG, ERP, fMRI. These are technologies that you have to keep studying, reading, updating yourself, having a team, getting the right team members, collaborators. That wasn't easy at all.
I
Yeah.
can imagine.
Yeah, so yeah, there have been sleepless nights and challenges. I always kept telling that if you have that goal that you want to achieve this, I feel at some point things do come converge and kind of help you out. Yeah.
That's lovely. It's nice to know that you pushed through because I'm very excited to, learn the kind of work that you're going to be doing at your laboratory. And I'm particularly something that I recently came up with is neuroplasticity or brain plasticity. And it's been garnering a lot of interest and attention, at least in discussions around personal development, the fact that you're not fixed and your traits are not fixed and you can work on it because that had been the perception for the longest time. So, for our audience, can you please explain brain plasticity and the role that music has to play in brain plasticity, and how does music benefit the human brain and its functions?
Yeah. So neural plasticity as such, you know, was initially the initial theories about 100 years ago. People thought brain is just static, like nothing can be changed.
Right,
Once you kind of reach a particular age of maturation, nothing can really change your certain traits, as you rightly mentioned, or certain behaviors cannot really be modified, or your so-called intelligence, cannot be
right,
improved at all. But uh, later years, through clinical research, observing patients, and a lot of research started talking about that. Not really, brain does heal itself. That was a crux for rehabilitation.
mm,
So it was a post-World War. A lot of neurologists, neuropsychologists, psychologists started working with war veterans who had, damage to their brain, and then they started working with them. They realized that no, the person can learn something new even after there has been a damage to a particular area of the brain. And the other thing was that there are certain areas of the brain that are crucial for certain functions, let's say like language. So there are
right,
specific area for comprehension of speech or production of speech or looking at basic sound processing, whereas complex sound processing or visual areas. There are primary visual areas, secondary visual areas. So each of our sensory processes do go through different levels of processing, and different
right.
areas of the brain are important for such functions. So the view was that there are very crucial areas of the brain. So you always have to think of it like a symphony. I keep giving this
Mm,
example. So you have a melody written for, let's say, a flute symphony or a violin, but you have other members of that symphony, supporting this particular composition that has been written.
right.
Similarly, in the brain, there are certain areas that become the lead for certain
Mm,
functions, but there are other areas of the brain that support this function. So today,
mm,
what we know is brain works like network. There are multiple networks. So the key thing now is that these networks are modifiable, can be strengthened, can be changed, manipulated through experiences. So
yeah.
brain is a dynamic, kind of phenomenon. It's not like just a mass of neurons or connections that are there, and if there is a damage to it, and that's about it. Of course, severity of the injury and all that matters undoubtedly, but if you look at it from a normal developmental perspective, we are born with more number of neurons. So by adolescent age, there's a process that happens what we call as pruning. That means
Mhm.
the nature decides, okay, why do we need so many extra neurons? Let's keep only those that are really important. So pruning
Mm.
happens. It's like, taking away those connections that are not really required. That's why we keep stressing upon enriched environment during the early developmental stages. So the more
Right.
connections you make, the more we use these different neurons, different areas of the brain, the stronger it is. So this neural plasticity, the word plasticity actually came from physics. That means you are
Mm.
malleable. Something is, modifiable. So brain is something like that, that you can modify, you can, and today what we know is it's a veritable nature of the human brain.
Mm.
So neural plasticity can also be a negative one also. It's not always a
Mm.
positive one. So your wrong habits are negative neural plasticity. There are
Yeah.
negative neural plasticity we observe in clinical conditions like stroke, for example.
Okay.
So
Okay.
where the wiring is not proper and behaviors are not adaptable. So there could be
Okay.
maladaptive behaviors that are not right. So neural plasticity is this veritable nature of the brain, which also becomes the guiding principle or the underlying phenomena through which we can improve our functions. And that's what is actually driving this whole field of neuro rehabilitation, that you could improve brain
Fantastic.
function. Yeah. Yeah.
Fantastic. So, can you talk about how music affects neuroplasticity?
Yeah.
Is that why, like you mentioned about the fact that children have greater neural networks when they're younger, and then the pruning happens? Is that why they learn languages faster? They learn instruments faster when
Yes.
they're younger? Okay.
Yes. 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 As we grow older, we need more, time to build that connection. So it's like
Right.
the number of times you practice, the connections become stronger. So
See.
as simple as that. And yeah, and coming to the music, yeah, that the second part of your question I missed out is that as we know, music is, as we understand today, is one of the most complex process. It's also considered as a neurocognitive process, undoubtedly. So
Hmm.
today as in, because earlier in the field of psychology and neuroscience and all, music was not considered as a adaptive process at all, as
I
a
see.
phenomena that is biologically based. It was more from a social science, cultural, like more entertainment, something that's there. People didn't
Right.
take it seriously as a biological phenomenon. And,
Hmm.
in the field, even Darwin, for that matter, I've mentioned this in several of my earlier talks, where Darwin, we all know about evolutionary theorists, right? So he initially said music does not have any adaptive value at all. So it's just sitting there, like, perhaps like a spandrel to development of language.
I see.
So is it that music was just there to support development of language in humans, or
Hmm.
does it have any other adaptive value? Any behavior
Hmm.
should have some adaptive value, right? So what's the role of music in our lives? Is this question that people are still asking. There's so much more
Yeah.
to understand. We would, perhaps it's like the hen and the chick. We may not reach a perfect answer to say whether language came first or music came first, but we know that there are so many features that music has,
Yeah.
which is also shared by language, undoubtedly.
Hmm.
And today, so as I said, now these different areas of the brain gets activated. If you take music that way, has multiple components. So music is looked at from a modular approach. Modules means you can break down the components of music. So when I say
Hmm.
music, we'll say there's pitch, there's timbre, there's rhythm, there's beat, there's emotion, and there's so many components, lyrics, right? So
Right.
each of these components of music are processed in different areas of the brain. After it becomes an auditory signal, initial signal, then it gets allotted to different areas of the brain to process those information. Then
Hmm.
comes to us like we perceive this as music. We,
Oh.
we kind of take it for granted, right? Just like language.
Yeah.
How did we learn language? We learned first using those words, those short syllables, then say appa, then mama, then, then club those words and make into sentence. Then cultural, we are exposed to certain languages. So we may learn Hindi, we may learn Kannada, we may learn English, then we know how to make sentences and the meaning of those words and where to use those words, contextual. So similarly, music. So music, what it does is activates different areas of the brain at one go. So one of the
Mm.
theories, as now with lot of evidence from different labs across the globe, is that one the reason why music is existing in our lives is because it's like the best way to activate, keep your brain active. So,
Wow.
um, so it's like the best prophylaxis, right? So, not that everyone should become musicians. It's not like
Mm.
everyone becomes poets, right? Not everyone becomes Shakespeare. But we
Right.
all use language. Similarly, we all indulge in music. So it's like on a continuum. And music, therefore, is like the best um, way to keep your brain active.
Wow.
And
So
that's
that
changing
is why you say.
the concept of neural plasticity. So you are basically activating different areas, different networks. So you're activating the auditory network because it's an auditory signal. Then you
Yeah.
have the memory network because you listen to a song. Oh, this song, you have autobiographical connections that are linked, so many engrams that are linked, nodes, memory nodes
Right.
that are. Then it activates emotional area. It also is such a strong, as you initially began your interview with that, saying that it's such an emotion a strong emotional elicitor.
Yeah.
So you can't just say brain, right? Brain also is an electrical and chemical pathway, like how it functions. So it releases certain neurochemicals that helps, like endorphins, natural painkillers, or feel good factor. You feel happy or you feel emotions that activate certain neurotransmitters which have beneficial effect on your physiology and motor pathways. So that's another crucial thing. When you listen to music, it engages your motor pathway. So you tap to music,
Oh.
you bang your head, you move your body. Babies to respond to music, right? They shake their whole body. They like rhythm. So rhythm is one key thing, which is the other side of music, right? Music and rhythm,
Yeah.
melody and rhythm. So it activates the whole brain. So that's why it's like considered as the best cognitive gym. And therefore
Wow.
musicians became the the so-called ideal group to study neural plasticity because they spend so many hours and hours and hours practicing. And so how different is this? What does it have? The impact of so many hours of practice on the human brain, the structure and the function of the brain. So, and
Fascinating.
yeah, so actually, thanks to the cognitive neuroscience, the field itself has developed along with advancement in technology. This kind of research wouldn't have been possible without, say, EEG or fMRI or other. Now
To
we
be able
have,
to measure,
yeah,
these
yeah,
parameters.
yes, yes. So to study all this now. Yeah.
It's amazing that you mentioned this because a couple of days ago I'm reading this book by Dr. David Eagleman called Live Wired, and that talks about the fact that it doesn't matter what your brain is so adaptive that it doesn't matter what the sensory input is. For instance, if somebody is deaf, they will learn and adapt how to perceive music through the senses that they have in the body, whether that's a rhythm through the beat, the vibration, or even how people uh, who lose their sense of sight end up becoming more sensitive to echolocation. So, music, the fact that your brain is actually in a concealed black box, and how the sensory input ultimately becomes translated into every human brain is so unique. And it's so good to hear that music is the best cognitive gym, because I personally always try and find ways to try and sharpen myself. So I'm like brushing with my left teeth and trying to figure out my way in a dark room and all of that. So it's good to hear that, because one of my questions to you was this, that I'm not a musician, but I listen to music and I want to learn the instrument. So will this help me or people like me? So I'm happy to hear this, that yeah, it is a good cognitive gym. It keeps you sharp, and that's something that you're going to keep in mind. So I'll now come to my next question, which is, can you explain to our audience what is neuromusicology and how has this been impacting the lives of human beings? This is what your lab is studying, from what I
Yeah,
read.
yeah. So as the word says, neuro and musicology. So it's like, you're understanding the neural correlates of music perception and cognition. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
and for example, neuropsychology is understanding this interrelationship between the brain and the behavior. So
Mm-hmm.
neuromusicology is one of the branches in the field of neuroscience and cognitive neuroscience, looking at music as a tool to understand the functioning of the human brain itself.
Oh.
Yeah, yeah. So
Oh. And how does neuromusicology have a role to what role does neuromusicology have in musical therapy, and what is the what is the neuroscience or the scientific basis behind musical therapy?
So as I mentioned, music, the benefits of music, the therapeutic aspect of music has always been known for ages, right?
Mm,
If you look at
mm,
history, um, all cultures, you look into Greek or Indian or other philosophies and other knowledge branches, people have mentioned about the benefits of music.
yeah,
But the key thing, of course, like in any other science, is like how and why. Why should this benefit? How does this happen? So this you're looking at more from the current science, the present science, so to say, to give answers as to how this is beneficial. Now, uh, as a, like as I said, the music therapy as a pedagogy or a field of academic and research pursuit or the clinical field formally emerged post World War in the West. Okay,
I
if you
see.
look at Indian history, of course, we have had Ayurveda, which has Nada therapy or Nada Chikitsa, Raga Chikitsa. It has been there for several centuries. But
I
the
see.
key thing is in the so-called the Western music therapy fields, people have asked, okay, why, how, right? So the explanation are given through different schools of psychology. We have different schools of psychology, like Freud, Sigmund Freud, psychoanalytic school of thought, or Viktor Frankl's humanistic or existential school of thought. So people try to explain through different schools of thought that
I
music
see.
perhaps taps to your unconscious and emotions, or music gives a meaning to your life, and that's how it explained. So the neuroscience field, actually the neuromusicology research, has now contributed to our understanding of, okay, so you give this stimulus, you give this treatment, you give this auditory stimulus, these are the brain areas that are getting activated, and these are the changes that are happening. To give you an example, patients who have had stroke, okay,
Mm,
they have a certain stroke in the frontal region, the left sided especially, would have Broca's aphasia. That means they have difficulty with production of speech. They
I
understand,
see.
they comprehend well, but they are unable to say words in a full sentence and in a comprehensible manner. So there is a particular method called melodic intonation therapy, which has been
Mm-hmm.
used even in the 1940s, 50s. People have used this method. But later, neuroscience research, as I said, we've had imaging, structural imaging, functional imaging, which actually showed that by doing this therapy as an intervention, melodic intonation therapy, you're activating the very same speech areas, not on the left hemisphere, but on the right hemisphere, on the other side.
Oh,
And the connection, there's a comprehension area, that's the Wernicke's area, and there's a Broca's area. So by around 70 sessions of these actually strengthen the band of fibers, the connecting these two areas of the brain. So patients were able to speak in a sing-song manner rather than the actual speech way. So you are helping patients, but you're also answering as to how this is happening. What are the changes in the brain that's happening? So neuroscience, the research that's happening in neuromusicology is actually providing evidence for music therapy. And so now we have a whole uh, a group of music therapists following what we call as the neurologic music therapy. So the principles are drawn from the evidence that we gather from neuroscience research, and
Mm,
understanding how systematically can we structure these therapeutic sessions and therapy sessions. So it's not like just making patients listen to music. It's not
mm,
passive listening or making them sing music. No, just go back a few seconds what I mentioned, that you're looking at components of music. So you may just
mm.
take beat, for example, or you may take
Oh,
this the rhythm. You may just take the even singing, for example. You may take singing in a particular way where you fill in the gaps with meaningful words. So patients with dementia, for example, have difficulty finding words. So if you tap their um, that is there, songs, and you're helping them connect those words. So even to say, I need coffee, they may not even get that word, I need coffee, I need something. They will keep saying something, but then you help them through singing to say, I need coffee. So
wow.
like, you're not making them musicians, but you're actually using this skill that's there with each one of us. Like we listen to music, we remember our rhymes, we remember certain songs, we remember our maths tables through sing song manner. If you write, so we remember two ones are two, two twos are four, two threes are six. In a sing song manner. We don't say it. So that way, music, yeah, you're looking at components of music and looking at where exactly are you working on, which areas of the brain is getting activated.
So is it like music, like you mentioned, is like language? That's why you say it's a biological phenomenon where we don't know whether it was language or music that first evolved in the human brain, but it has very much been a part of the human brain and the evolution of the human brain because they closely interlinked.
Yes, yes. In
Wow. And
yeah,
And an analogy to this may be something like a physiotherapy, where people initially, when they didn't understand physiotherapy, they just asked you to exercise. But then, when they understood what muscle you need to move or what ligament you need to move to be able to get the desired outcome, that's probably what I hear you say through
exactly.
music.
Yes, yes,
Wow.
exactly. So
Wow.
cognitive rehabilitation, neuropsychological rehabilitation is exactly that, looking at uh, understanding, having a sound knowledge of the neural correlates of these cognitive functions, like say
Hmm.
attention, memory, or planning or decision making. You are actually understanding the neural correlates, the functions, the networks, and then later use this knowledge to rehabilitate in clinical population, or use it in understanding the behavior itself in the general population. Yeah.
Fascinating. Another aspect that I came across in one of your talks was with respect to music and its effect on stress and anxiety. We all like have a basic philosophical understanding of the fact that music helps with reducing stress and anxiety. But can you talk about the neuro rehabilitation aspect of it? I also read that you've been working with patients who are suffering from lifestyle diseases like diabetes, and music helps with reducing the stress and anxiety associated with increasing diabetes. So can you talk a little about that? I would love your views on that.
Yeah. So it was interesting how I ended up working with patients with diabetes, right? So
Right.
there's a student who actually came from another institute, and I was a co-guide for her PhD work. And there was this mandate by that particular university for that time point that they should do some research work with patients with diabetes. And
Mm,
I was here working with music and patients in the neuro population, not directly in diabetes, but these are
mm,
things. When some challenges come about, you come up with a new idea. And, then I sat through and decided that one, as you rightly mentioned, diabetes is also a lifestyle disease,
mm,
especially diabetes too. One, of course,
mm.
has other reasons.
Genetic on it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So diabetes too, especially, also our increased stress levels, increased anxiety can actually keep the sugar levels high. So
Mm,
particular pathway in the brain, we call it as the hypothalamic pituitary axis, HPA axis. Okay.
okay.
So, uh, when we are stressed, when we are extremely anxious, this pathway gets activated and
Mm,
cortisol is released, right?
mm,
Even otherwise, normally also there is cortisol that's released, but there is increased levels of cortisol. Cortisol is a measure of how much stress you are actually experiencing.
Right.
Too much of it can be harmful. So much so that it can actually start corroding certain areas of the brain, which can have impact on your memory. So
Mm.
extreme stress, post-traumatic stress, people who have gone through extreme trauma also have neurocognitive deficits for the very same reason, because there's underlying brain which is also getting impacted, right? Along,
Yeah.
so you can't keep away the brain and the experiences, the emotions, everything that we are going through. So
Yeah.
the one way to reduce this cortisol level or reduce this anxiety is through music. We all know music can have, a relaxing effect of it. So we used this hypothesis and made a small module of 20 sessions for patients who were undergoing treatment. And we said, why not use music? Also
Mm.
singing to some bit. So we brought it as like a module of 20 sessions and looked at not just their anxiety and stress levels, but also does it have any impact on their cognitive functions. So we found that
Mm.
attention, their working memory. Working memory is like your RAM of the computer.
Yeah.
So improving your RAM helps your computer to run faster, right? No matter how large is your hard disk, if your RAM is not updated, you cannot run too many windows at the same time. Your computer will become slow.
Yeah.
So working memory is something like that. So we found that, yeah, it was one of the initial work, like an exploratory study. Hopefully, we'll be able to carry out similar work in larger group and yeah, yeah. That's
That's fantastic. And given the pandemic now, and the fact that we're back to where we were in 2020, um, two key takeaways from what I understood is that music A is a good cognitive gym for you if you want to keep your brain sharper, if you want to engage all parts of your brain, then learn some sort of musical instrument or listen to music. And this second aspect is of stress and anxiety that will help in reducing stress and anxiety. So this is applicable to a person who's not even affected by, say, a lifestyle disease, but it can help somebody who is, so to speak, doesn't have any issues as such.
yeah, yeah, yeah. It again,
Superb.
a lot of aspects are intertwined, like what kind of music you listen to, because
Right.
yeah, those things can also, because music is again an auditory signal. So if it's too loud, and with rhythm can entrain, as I said, it entrains your motor pathway. It can also alter your heartbeat. So
Hmm.
choosing the right music is also important. I do agree that engaging any sort of musical activity would be beneficial, because you're activating that area of the brain which perhaps you may not have activated at all. So there's nothing like you should feel shy that, oh, I may never become a professional musician. That should not be the goal. And as a, not as a musician or a researcher in neuromusicology, but as a pure clinician, as a neuropsychologist, what I would advise is, do different things. You may, so I keep saying master, we keep saying na, master of you be jack of all and master of one.
None. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
But you say be master of one or two, but you can be jack of all. It's okay, because that's
Yeah.
you are actually enhancing your cognitive reserve.
Okay.
Enhancing your cognitive reserve is a prophylaxis for degenerative conditions. So when we see patients, we see that people who maybe, like stalwart in a given area, but in other things, if they're zero, cognitive
Hmm.
reserve is less. To give you an analogy, let's say in Delhi or Mumbai or Bangalore, there's so much of traffic jam, right? So you have to go from point A to point B. If
Hmm.
you're smart enough, you know that there are different gullies or small alleys which you can take you to that destination. But
Yeah.
if you're always stuck to the highway and if there's a traffic jam, you're lost.
Yeah.
So it's good to keep your brain sharp through doing different activities. So and music can be one of those, definitely. Yeah.
And what type of music you mentioned that not all types of music will have that de-stressing effect. So what type of music would have a
Yeah.
de-stressing effect?
Talking about relaxation as such, not from the music therapy in terms of what I mentioned, right?
Yes.
In
Yes.
components of cognitive processes as such. But relaxation, definitely, I would say not too much of um, fast music or with high beat. The so it should be something that's more soft, which can be instrumental music, stringed instruments. These are the things that people do feel highly relaxed.
I
Yeah.
see. I see. And also there's a lot of like a talk now about music and the meditative effects that music can have, and or music taking you to altered states. Do you have any views on that? I'd love to understand what you think of that.
Yeah, music does have, changes your emotional uh, state, definitely.
Hmm.
And in my own research, what we did, just to share an experience. So I had these excerpts from Hindustani classical music, and I had these
I see.
students, PhD students, who would come as participants, like healthy participants. They said, I never listened to Hindustani classical music. I never used to this genre. And perhaps even if I heard, it's only, childhood Doordarshan, which would play, for condolence, things like that. Those are the kind of memories they had. But we did an EEG recording, that's the electrophysiological recording. And what we found was increased alpha, increased gamma, which is akin to a meditative state. And after the
Hmm.
experiment, many of them came back and said, can I have more of these excerpts? Can you share these excerpts? So it's also to do with exposure to that kind of genre.
Hmm.
And certain music may have, yes, meditative effect. So I thought we need to do more research. I cannot generalize just with these kind of small experiments that we have done, but I feel it's like bitter medicine. Sometimes the medicine you take may taste something you may not like, but the
Yeah.
effect it has on your body, you cannot stop that. So,
Yeah.
so music, certain genres of music, including our classical music, can have a lot of relaxing effect.
So you mentioned increased alpha and increased gamma. Can you explain that? Because I have a very brief understanding of that, where beta is the state where you're mostly at, alpha is when you're focused, and gamma is when you're just before going to sleep, that state when your mind is super
Yeah,
receptive.
so there are different electrical waveforms, right? So based on those frequencies, the names are given. So when
Mm-hmm.
you are just eyes closed, just rest position, there is posterior alpha. That means alpha activity is higher in the back side of the brain. Uh,
Okay.
but let's say when you're doing in your sleeping, theta activity is observed or delta activity is
Mm-hmm.
observed. It's again changes with children. Babies have more delta activity than adults. Babies are mostly in in that kind of state where they're asleep kind of thing. But when you're doing let's say some maths or some calculation, very focused way of doing, you have FM theta activity. So it's only in the frontal midline theta activity. So there are different studies that have been done to correlate the concentration of these activities increasing with certain kinds of behavior. So alpha, anterior alpha, or increased overall alpha waves is to say that you're highly relaxed at least.
Mm.
Gamma is also when in people have observed in meditators when you are going into highly in-depth meditative state. People have observed gamma activity.
I see. I
So
see.
um,
It's fascinating that music has that capability.
yes, yes, yes,
Wow. That's superb. This is really, really good. I do now want to come to you, and I would love to understand that you are into very difficult disciplines of music as well as neuroscience. Like I mentioned, it requires you to do research. It requires you to also practice your clinical neuropsychology, and at the same time, you pursue your passion in music as a vocalist. So can you tell us about some of your habits that that have been consistently present in your life that have helped you in pursuing your passions in your career and in your life?
Uh, one looking back, it has always been, persistent. You,
Uh,
it may have its own side effects. You become a little sticky or whatever that you may call, but you're persistent. That you have some goals. You're very passionate about it. And I remember even during college days, I would say I would love to do, like know more curiosity. I always like to know why, the child, like we should never let go our child in us in asking about curious things. And you ask why, and not feel afraid when people kind of make silly, they may discard your kind of ideas or passion and say, is it really worth exploring this? Just say it's okay. I would love to do that.
Yeah.
If only I had said, no, I'll keep music aside and I will not club it with neuropsychology just because it's not there. I wouldn't
Hmm.
be where I am today, right? So um, I said, let me kind of look into it in this perspective. And the other thing is short-term goals and long-term goals. So I always keep these weekly goals as well. It is when
Oh.
I'm an academician, I have teaching, I have clinical, I have administrative work and music and family. So it's like juggling too many things. So sometimes it's crazy, but the best thing is being clear about what goals you want to achieve. And so short term and long term goals. So 5 years from now, you may reach that goal or not. That's okay, but at least you're at it. And so yeah, so be happy with those
All
things. Yeah.
all gold. I mean, persistence, most definitely the only thing that'll, if you're somebody who thinks of a long term goal, then persistence is the only thing that's going to work. If you give up, you're just going to give up. You'll never know where you'll get to. Then you spoke about curiosity. I personally am a big fan of curiosity. I don't care when I'm asking dumb questions. I think that's the only time when that's also in my way of trying to sharpen my brain on a consistent basis. You'll never know, even if you're an expert in a field, you'll never know everything about
Yeah.
that field. So curiosity is again a gold advice that you've given. Another thing that you mentioned about not being scared about venturing into other areas, open mindedness, I think, is so important. The more open minded you are, I think in the long term your curiosity as a human being continues to stay, your will to be excited about life continues to stay. So goal, and yeah, goal setting, I'm all about goal setting. So yeah, short term, long term goals is
And
so key.
never too late to learn anything new. So you always
Yes.
keep learning and you keep learning and
Yeah.
joy of okay, I learned something new. That's it. Simple things that I didn't know this, so now I've learned this. So this learning.
Yeah, like you mentioned, you don't need to become an expert or a musician to be able to want to learn music. It's like then for that by that logic, you shouldn't pursue anything because you're not going to become experts at everything that you pursue. So that's fantastic, really really wonderful advice. And this is a question that I ask all my guests: what, according to you, does it take to be resolute?
I think I already mentioned whatever it takes to be so. And
Uh,
um, yeah, just keep going. And I think the key thing is if you have a larger intention to help, people around you. Like I was personally felt grateful that I chose psychology and I have music, and because you are able to bring some happiness in another person's life. And
uh,
for me, having these kind of goals that don't have any personal agenda, like you can contribute something back to the society, and the kind of that I think is the key thing. In addition
that
to whatever
is
I shared. Yeah.
That is beautiful. I think ultimately that's what we're all craving for, right? If we can come to a point where we can be of service beyond self,
Yeah.
then that's like the ultimate way of getting to a point where you can change your passion into purpose. Thank you so much for coming on the show, Shantala. We loved having this conversation with you.
Yeah.
I'm looking forward to the wonderful work that your laboratory is doing. I'm going to keep an eye and keep learning from you and keep bugging you to learn more. Uh,
Need to meet you and to know you. Thank you so much. Thank you for that.
Thank you so much. Please keep inspiring and stay resolute.
Thank you. Best wishes. Bye.
Thank you.
I hope you liked this episode. For more content to empower your mindset, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. And do share this with the resolute women in your life. Take care and bye bye.